Before I tell you this story, I need you to understand something. I don't believe in UFOs. Never have. I'm a practical man, born and raised in Nebraska farm country, where we deal in soil quality and rainfall, not flying saucers and little green men. So, when the crop circles started appearing in the summer of '97, I was the guy telling everyone it was kids with planks and rope, making patterns for attention. I was so sure I was right that I staked out a field for 3 straight nights, determined to catch the pranksters in the act. On the 3rd night, I did see what made those circles, and I was right. It wasn't aliens. But what I saw, God help me, I wish it had been aliens. My name is Dale Hutchins, and I need to tell you this before I lose my nerve. It started in late June, right after the corn had grown tall enough to hide a full-grown man. The first circle appeared on the Hendrickson farm, about 15 miles east of Lincoln. Bob Hendrickson called it in himself, half excited, half terrified. "Sheriff, you gotta see this," he'd said on the phone, his voice shaking. "Something came down in my north field last night. Left a mark bigger than my barn. I drove out there expecting vandalism, maybe some teenagers who'd watched too many episodes of The X-Files. What I found was a perfect circle, maybe 60 feet in diameter, carved into Bob's cornfield like someone had used a giant compass. The corn wasn't cut or broken, it was bent. Every single stalk was curved at the base, woven into this intricate spiral pattern that looked almost deliberate, almost artistic. Bob stood at the edge of the circle, his John Deere cap pushed back on his head, staring at his ruined crop like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Dale," he said when he saw me, "I've been farming this land for 42 years. Never seen anything like this." I walked the perimeter, my boots crunching on the dry summer soil. The corn at the edge of the circle was perfectly normal, standing tall, reaching for the August sun. But the moment you crossed that invisible line, everything changed. It was like someone had drawn a boundary with a ruler. "You hear anything last night?" I asked. Bob shook his head. "That's the thing, Dale. I didn't hear a damn thing, and I was up till past midnight with the cattle. Whatever did this, it was silent." I crouched down, examining one of the bent stalks. It was curved at a perfect 90-degree angle about 6 inches from the base, but the stalk wasn't cracked or damaged. It was like someone had heated it up and bent it while it was soft. But there were no burn marks, no signs of tools or machinery. "Kids," I said, standing up and brushing the dirt off my knees. "Has to be. Probably some fraternity prank from the university." Bob gave me a look that said he didn't believe that for a second, but he didn't argue. In farm country, you learn not to speak too much about things you can't explain. "Bad luck," my grandmother used to say. I took some photos with my department-issue camera, filled out a vandalism report, and told Bob I'd keep an eye out. As I was walking back to my cruiser, I noticed something odd. There were no footprints leading to or from the circle. The corn around it was undisturbed, standing in neat rows like soldiers at attention. Whatever had made that pattern had come from above, or... I pushed the thought away. Practical explanations only. The second circle appeared 3 nights later on the Morrison property, 12 miles south. Then another one 4 days after that on the old Yoder farm. By mid-July, we had 6 circles scattered across Lancaster County, each one appearing between 2 and 4 a.m., each one perfectly formed with that same impossible bend in the corn stalks. The media got wind of it, of course. Local TV stations ran segments about Nebraska's crop circle mystery. UFO enthusiasts started showing up from out of state, setting up cameras in fields, waiting for lights in the sky. The Lincoln Journal-Star ran a front-page story with the headline, "Are We Being Visited?" I spent most of those weeks fielding calls from concerned citizens, annoyed farmers, and conspiracy theorists who wanted to tell me about government cover-ups and alien abductions. My deputy, Tommy Garrett, thought the whole thing was hilarious. "Maybe you should check the cornfields for little green footprints, Sheriff." He'd joke, grinning over his coffee. I wasn't laughing. 6 circles meant 6 ruined sections of crop. That was real money coming out of real farmers' pockets. And the pattern bothered me. All the affected farms were in the eastern part of the county, spread out in what almost looked like a line running north to south. And every single farmer had reported the same thing. They hadn't heard anything the night the circles appeared. It was the silence that got under my skin. A prank would be noisy, kids laughing, trucks driving across fields, maybe even helicopters if someone was trying to fake an alien landing. But this was happening without a sound. On July 18th, I decided to do something about it. The Collins farm sat almost exactly in the middle of where I'd predicted the next circle would appear, based on the pattern I'd been tracking. James Collins was a no-nonsense cattle rancher who'd converted part of his land to corn 3 years ago. His north field was 7 miles from the nearest house, surrounded by empty farmland on all sides. If someone was making these circles, the Collins farm was the perfect target. I called James and told him my plan. "I'm going to park in your field tonight. Stake it out. If someone shows up, I'll catch them red-handed." James was quiet for a moment. Then, "Dale, you sure you want to do that?" "I mean, what if it's not kids?" "Then I'll find out what it is," I said, more confident than I felt. That night, I drove my personal truck, a beat-up Ford F-150 that wouldn't stand out in farm country, and parked it at the edge of Collins' north field around 10 p.m. I brought coffee, a flashlight, my service weapon, and a camera with a telephoto lens. The sky was clear, scattered with stars, the kind of night where you could see the Milky Way stretching across the darkness like a river of light. I settled in to wait. The first hour was peaceful. Crickets chirping, the occasional rustle of wind through the corn. I sipped my coffee and watched the field, my eyes scanning for any movement. By midnight, I was starting to think this was a waste of time. Maybe the pattern I'd identified was just coincidence. Maybe the circles would stop appearing now that people were paying attention. At 1:30 a.m., the crickets stopped chirping. It happened all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. One moment the night was alive with sound, the next it was dead silent. Even the wind seemed to die down. I sat up straighter, my hand moving instinctively to my weapon. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a sound exactly. It was more like a vibration, a low, rhythmic thumping that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It reminded me of a heartbeat, slow and steady, pulsing through the ground beneath my truck. I could feel it in my chest, in my bones. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the truck door as quietly as I could. The vibration was stronger now, more intense. It felt like standing next to a bass speaker at a concert, except there was no music, just that deep, resonant pulse. The corn in front of me started to move, not swaying in the wind. Moving. The stalks were bending, all at once, folding down in a spiral pattern that spread out from a central point about 100 yards into the field. It happened fast, maybe 30 seconds from start to finish. The vibration stopped the moment the last stalk bent into place. Then the silence came back. Complete, absolute silence. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding, the flashlight shaking in my hand. Every practical explanation I'd convinced myself of evaporated in an instant. This wasn't kids with planks. This wasn't a hoax. This was something else. I should have gotten back in my truck. I should have radioed for backup. But instead, I did the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. I walked into that cornfield. The bent stalks crunched under my boots as I made my way toward the center of the circle. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating row after row of perfectly folded corn. The air felt different here, thicker somehow, charged with something I couldn't name. When I reached the center, I saw it. There was a hole. Not a hole like you dig with a shovel. This was perfectly circular, maybe 3 feet in diameter, carved straight down into the earth. The sides were smooth, almost glassy, like the soil had been melted instead of dug. My flashlight beam couldn't find the bottom. I knelt down, peering into the darkness. The hole seemed to go down forever, disappearing into blackness that my light couldn't penetrate. A cold draft came up from below, carrying with it a smell that made my stomach turn, earthy and rotten, like a grave that had been opened after years underground. That's when I heard the scratching. It came from deep in the hole, faint but distinct, something moving against stone or dirt, scraping its way upward. My rational mind screamed at me to run, but I was frozen, staring down into that impossible tunnel while something climbed toward me from the depths below. The scratching got louder. Closer, I finally broke free of my paralysis and stumbled backward, my boot catching on a bent cornstalk. I hit the ground hard, the flashlight flying from my hand and spinning across the ground, its beam cutting wild arcs through the darkness. In that spinning light, I saw something emerge from the hole. An arm. But wrong. All wrong. The fingers were too long, the joints bent at angles that shouldn't be possible. The skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over bones that looked too thin to support any weight. It groped blindly at the edge of the hole, searching for purchase. I found my flashlight and ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck, didn't stop to look back, didn't stop to think about what I'd seen. I just ran, crashing through the corn like a spooked deer, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I made it to my truck, fumbled with the keys, and got the engine started. As I threw it into reverse, my headlights swept across the field one last time. The circle was there, perfect and pristine in the headlight beams, but the hole was gone. The center of the circle showed nothing but bent corn, the same as everywhere else. No tunnel, no disturbed earth, nothing to indicate that anything had been there at all. I drove home at 20 miles over the speed limit, my hands shaking on the wheel, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Shadows and darkness playing tricks on an exhausted mind. That's all it was. But I knew better. I knew what I'd seen climbing out of that hole. I knew the circles weren't made from above. They were made from below, and whatever was making them was getting closer to the surface. In that spinning light, I saw something emerge from the hole. An arm. But wrong. All wrong. The fingers were too long, the joints bent at angles that shouldn't be possible. The skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over bones that looked too thin to support any weight. It groped blindly at the edge of the hole, searching for purchase. I found my flashlight and ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck, didn't stop to look back, didn't stop to think about what I'd seen. I just ran, crashing through the corn like a spooked deer, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I made it to my truck, fumbled with the keys, and got the engine started. As I threw it into reverse, my headlights swept across the field one last time. The circle was there, perfect and pristine in the headlight beams, but the hole was gone. The center of the circle showed nothing but bent corn, the same as everywhere else. No tunnel, no disturbed earth, nothing to indicate that anything had been there at all. I drove home at 20 miles over the speed limit, my hands shaking on the wheel, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Shadows and darkness playing tricks on an exhausted mind. That's all it was. But I knew better. I knew what I'd seen climbing out of that hole. I knew the circles weren't made from above. They were made from below, and whatever was making them was getting closer to the surface. He looked at me then, and I saw fear in his eyes, real, bone-deep fear. 1894, he said. My grandfather lived through it. He was just a boy, but he remembered. Told me the stories before he died. He gestured at the circle. This is how it started then, too. Circles in the fields, holes in the ground. People started disappearing. Disappearing, I repeated, thinking about the census numbers. How many? Thousands, the old man said. Whole families gone overnight. The government said it was cholera, economic hardship, people just moving on. But my grandfather knew better. He saw what came up from those holes. A chill ran down my spine despite the summer heat. What did he see? The old man shook his head. He never told me. Said some things you don't speak out loud, because speaking them makes them real. But he made me promise something. He looked at me intently. If the circles ever came back, I should leave. Take my family and go as far away as possible. And are you, I asked, leaving? He nodded slowly. Tomorrow morning. Selling the farm to the first person who'll take it, probably at a loss. Don't care. He turned to walk away, then stopped. Sheriff, you seem like a decent man. Take my advice. Stop investigating this. Nothing good comes from digging where you're not meant to dig. I'm the sheriff, I said. It's my job to investigate. Then God help you, he said, and walked away through the corn. I never got his name. By the time I thought to check property records the next day, the Blackwell place had been sold to an out-of-state investment company. The old man was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by photocopied newspaper articles and handwritten notes, trying to piece together a puzzle that had been buried for over a century. The circles, the disappearances, the holes in the ground, it all connected somehow, but I couldn't see how. At 2:17 a.m., my phone rang. It was Tommy, my deputy, his voice tight with tension. Sheriff, we got a situation. Multiple calls coming in about sounds in the eastern part of the county. People saying they hear, I don't know how to describe it. Rumbling, vibrations. I was already grabbing my keys. Where? All over. At least 15 different farms reporting the same thing. Started about 20 minutes ago. I drove east on Highway 6, my emergency lights cutting through the darkness. The radio crackled with more calls. People frightened, confused, reporting that their houses were shaking, pictures falling off walls, dogs going crazy. Then, all at once, it stopped. The radio went silent. My truck's headlights seemed to dim for a moment, like something had drained the power from everything electrical. And in that moment of silence and darkness, I saw them, lights in the fields, not lights from above, not UFOs or helicopters. These lights were coming from the ground, dozens of them scattered across the farmland, glowing with a sickly green phosphorescence, each one marking a spot where a crop circle had appeared. I pulled over, my hands shaking on the wheel, and watched as the lights slowly faded, one by one, until the darkness swallowed them up again. When I finally made it home as the sun was rising, I found something on my doorstep. A manila envelope, no return address, no postage. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the Blackwell farm, but not as it looked now. This was from the 1890s, judging by the clothing of the people in the photo. A family stood in front of the old farmhouse, a man, a woman, and 3 children. They were all smiling. Someone had drawn a red circle around the youngest child's face, and written on the back, in shaky handwriting, "They take the children first." I turned the photo over again, looking at that smiling family, and noticed something I'd missed. Behind them, barely visible in the background, was a cornfield. And in that cornfield, if you looked closely, you could see the edge of a circle pattern. The same pattern that was appearing in fields all across Lancaster County, right now, more than 100 years later. Whatever had happened in 1894 was happening again, and this time I was going to find out what it was, even if it killed me. The photograph changed everything. They take the children first wasn't just a warning, it was a pattern, a method. And if whatever happened in 1894 was happening again, I had maybe weeks before people started disappearing. I called an emergency meeting at the county courthouse on July 24th. I expected maybe a dozen people to show up. Instead, the meeting room was packed with over 100 farmers, their families, and concerned citizens. Word had spread about the circles, the lights, the sounds in the night. People were scared. I stood at the front of the room, the mysterious photograph in my hand, and told them everything I'd found. The 1894 disappearances, the census discrepancies, the old man's warning. I didn't tell them about what I'd seen climbing out of that hole. Not yet. Some things you had to see to believe. What we're dealing with, I said, choosing my words carefully, is an organized threat. Someone or something is creating these circles as markers. I believe they're connected to a series of underground tunnels. Tunnels? Someone called out. Like mining tunnels? No, I said. These are different. I struggled to find the right words. They're not man-made. The room erupted with questions, theories, accusations. Some people thought I was losing my mind. Others wanted to form armed patrols, protect their families. A few suggested calling in the National Guard. James Collins stood up, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Sheriff, what do you need from us?" I looked at him, then at the sea of worried faces surrounding me. I need to find out where these tunnels lead, map them, figure out what we're dealing with before anyone else gets hurt. "Then let's do it," James said. "I got equipment. Rope, lights, radios. We can explore one of these holes, see where it goes." I should have said no. Should have told him this was official police business, too dangerous for civilians. But the truth was, I was terrified of going down there alone. And James was a good man, calm under pressure. "Tomorrow night," I said. "We do this carefully. We do this smart. And if we find anything dangerous, we leave immediately. Agreed?" James nodded. So did a dozen other men in the room. Farmers, ranchers, practical men who'd lived their whole lives on this land and weren't about to let something drive them away without a fight. We spent the next day preparing. James brought climbing gear, battery-powered lanterns, two-way radios. I brought my service weapon, though I had no idea if it would help. We chose the hole at the old Blackwell farm. It was the largest and the property was abandoned, so we wouldn't risk involving innocent bystanders. We arrived at sunset. 4 of us. Me, James, a rancher named Bill Kaufman, and a young farmer named Miguel Santos. The hole was still there, exactly as I'd left it, that perfect circular shaft descending into darkness. "Jesus," Bill whispered, staring down into it. "That's deep." We set up a tripod and secured a climbing rope. I went first. It was my responsibility as sheriff. The rope bit into my hands as I rappelled down, my lantern swinging from my belt, casting wild shadows on the smooth tunnel walls. The tunnel went down about 30 feet before opening into a larger space. I stepped off the rope and swept my lantern around, my jaw dropping at what I saw. It was a chamber, maybe 20 feet across, with 6 additional tunnels branching off in different directions, like spokes on a wheel. The walls weren't dirt or rock. They were something else, something that looked almost organic, with a smooth, waxy texture that gleamed in my lantern light. The air was cold and damp, carrying that same grave smell I'd noticed before. "Sheriff?" James's voice crackled through the radio. "You okay down there?" "Yeah," I said, my voice echoing in the chamber. "Come down, you need to see this." One by one, they descended. Bill cursed when he saw the chamber. Miguel crossed himself and muttered a prayer in Spanish. James just stared, his practical farmer's mind trying to make sense of something that defied all logic. "These tunnels," he said, walking to one of the openings. "They're all perfectly circular, same diameter as the holes in the fields. They're connected," I realized. "Every crop circle, they're all entrance points to this same tunnel system." "But who made them?" Bill asked. "And why?" Before anyone could answer, we heard it. That sound, the scratching, scraping sound of something moving through the tunnels. It came from one of the side passages, echoing and multiplying until it seemed to surround us. "Back to the rope," I ordered, my hand on my weapon. "Now." But it was too late. They came from 3 tunnels at once, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. In the jerky light of our lanterns, I got my first clear look at them. They were pale, almost translucent. Their skin stretched tight over skeletal frames. They moved on all fours, but their limbs were too long, joints bending in wrong directions. Their heads were eyeless, smooth except for a vertical slit where a mouth should be. And when that slit opened, I saw rows of teeth like broken glass. Miguel screamed. Bill raised his rifle, but his hands were shaking too badly to aim. James grabbed the climbing rope, shouting for everyone to move. I fired 3 shots at the nearest creature. The bullets hit. I saw them strike its torso, but it barely slowed down. It hissed, a sound like steam escaping from a burst pipe, and lunged toward Miguel. I tackled him out of the way, both of us hitting the chamber floor hard. The creature sailed over us, its claws scraping the wall where Miguel's head had been a second before. It spun around with impossible speed, that vertical mouth opening wider, preparing for another attack. Then James hit it with his lantern. The glass shattered, and burning kerosene splashed across the creature's body. It shrieked, an awful, high-pitched sound that made my teeth ache, and writhed on the ground, its pale skin bubbling and blackening in the flames. "Fire!" James shouted. "They don't like fire." The other creatures retreated, backing into their tunnels with jerky, spider-like movements. Their mouths were all open now, all hissing, filling the chamber with that terrible steam pipe sound. We didn't wait to see if they'd come back. Bill went up first, then Miguel, both of them climbing faster than I'd ever seen anyone move on a rope. James and I held position at the bottom, our remaining lanterns held like weapons. "Go," James said to me. "I'll follow." I wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. I grabbed the rope and climbed, my arms burning, my lungs screaming for air. Behind me, I could hear James climbing, could hear those creatures hissing in the darkness below. We burst out of the hole into the cornfield, the evening air feeling impossibly sweet after the stench of those tunnels. Bill and Miguel were already running for the trucks. James and I were right behind them. We didn't stop until we were back at the courthouse, all 4 of us shaking, trying to process what we'd seen. Miguel couldn't stop crying. Bill kept checking his rifle like he was making sure it was real, that all of this was real. "What were those things?" James asked quietly. I shook my head. "I don't know, but they're not from here. They're not from anywhere on this earth." "So, what do we do?" I thought about the photograph, about they take the children first, about 11,000 people who'd vanished in 1894 and were never found. I thought about those creatures down in the dark, multiplying in their tunnels, waiting. "We fight," I said. "We find every entrance to that tunnel system and we collapse them. We burn those things out if we have to, because if we don't, I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't have to. That night, I finally called the state police, the FBI, anyone who might listen. I expected them to laugh at me, to think I'd lost my mind. Instead, I got transferred to a department I'd never heard of, spoke to an agent who asked questions like he already knew the answers. "Sheriff Hutchins," he said when I finished my report. "We're aware of the situation in Lancaster County. A team will arrive tomorrow morning. Until then, I need you to keep civilians away from the affected areas. Don't attempt any further exploration of the tunnels. And Sheriff, don't be surprised when we tell the public this is a gas leak." "A gas leak?" I said. "There are creatures down there. People need to know. People need to be kept safe," he interrupted. "We'll handle this. We've handled it before." He hung up before I could argue. I sat in my dark office, staring at the phone, understanding finally what the old man had meant. The government had known about this in 1894. They'd covered it up then, and they were going to cover it up now. But covering something up doesn't make it go away. And those creatures were still down there, in their tunnels, getting closer to the surface with every passing day. The federal team arrived at dawn in 3 black SUVs with government plates. 6 agents in dark suits, led by a man who introduced himself only as Morrison. He had the kind of face that was designed to be forgotten. Average height, average build, no distinguishing features. The perfect person to run a cover-up. "Sheriff Hutchins," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that was just a little too firm. "We appreciate your cooperation. From this point forward, we'll be handling the situation." "What situation?" I asked. "The one where creatures are living in tunnels under our farmland." Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Gas pockets, Sheriff. Methane seepage from underground geological formations. It's causing hallucinations, mass hysteria. We've seen it before." "I saw them," I said flatly. "So did 3 other men. Those weren't hallucinations. Methane exposure affects judgment, perception. You'd be surprised what the human brain can conjure when oxygen deprived." He pulled out a clipboard. "We'll need the names of everyone who's been near the affected sites. For medical evaluation, of course." I looked at the agents behind him, all standing at perfect attention, all wearing the same neutral expression. They weren't here to help. They were here to contain, not the creatures but the truth. "And if I don't cooperate?" I asked. Morrison's smile got wider. "Sheriff, I'd hate to see your pension disappear over a misunderstanding, or have questions raised about your fitness for duty. Mental health evaluations can take months. By then, I imagine the problem will have resolved itself. I'd been a cop long enough to know when I was beaten, or at least when to pretend I was beaten. What do you want me to do? Keep people away from the eastern farmlands. Tell them we're conducting environmental tests. We'll have everything wrapped up in 72 hours. He turned to leave, then stopped. "Oh, and Sheriff? The holes in the fields. We've already begun filling them with concrete, for everyone's safety." I watched them leave, their SUVs disappearing down Highway 6 in a cloud of dust. Then I got on the phone with James Collins. "They're going to bury it," I told him, literally. "Seal the tunnels with concrete and pretend nothing happened." "Will that work?" James asked. "Did it work in 1894? I shot back. "Whatever they did back then, those things came back, and they'll come back again unless we do something permanent." "Like what?" "Like making sure there's nothing left down there to come back." We spent the morning gathering supplies. Every farmer I trusted. Every man who'd seen what was really down in those tunnels. We loaded pickup trucks with diesel fuel, gasoline, fertilizer, anything flammable we could get our hands on. Morrison's team was focused on the eastern sites, the obvious ones. But I'd been mapping the circles, and I knew there were connections they hadn't found yet. Smaller holes, hidden in the more remote fields, places where the concrete trucks hadn't reached. By noon, we had identified 17 unsealed entrances, 17 points where those things could still emerge. "We'll work in teams," I said, standing in James's barn with 24 men around me. 2 men per site. Pour the fuel down the holes, but don't light it yet. We need to do this simultaneously, trap them in the tunnels with nowhere to run. Dale, Bill Kaufman, said quietly, "The feds are gonna know it was us." "I don't care," I said. "I'd rather go to prison than watch those things take our families." No one argued. These were men who'd spent their lives working the land, protecting what was theirs. They understood that some threats you couldn't just bury and hope they'd go away. We split up at 2 p.m., each team heading to their assigned location. James and I took the site at the old Blackwell farm, the largest unsealed entrance, the one where we'd first gone underground. We arrived to find the area cordoned off with yellow caution tape, but no federal agents in sight. They were stretched thin, dealing with the more visible sites. The hole was still there, that perfect circular shaft descending into darkness. James backed his truck up to the edge, and we started unloading 50-gallon drums of diesel fuel. It took us 20 minutes to pour it all down that hole, watching the liquid disappear into the depths. "Think this'll be enough?" James asked. "It better be," I said, keying my radio. "All teams, status check." One by one, they reported in. 17 sites, 17 teams, all ready. I checked my watch, 3:47 p.m. "Light 'em up in 3 minutes," I said, "synchronized, and then get the hell out of there." James pulled out a road flare, the kind we kept in patrol cars for emergencies. He handed it to me. "You should do the honors, Sheriff." The federal team arrived at dawn in 3 black SUVs with government plates. 6 agents in dark suits, led by a man who introduced himself only as Morrison. He had the kind of face that was designed to be forgotten. Average height, average build, no distinguishing features. The perfect person to run a cover-up. "Sheriff Hutchins," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that was just a little too firm. "We appreciate your cooperation. From this point forward, we'll be handling the situation." "What situation?" I asked. "The one where creatures are living in tunnels under our farmland." Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Gas pockets, Sheriff. Methane seepage from underground geological formations. It's causing hallucinations, mass hysteria. We've seen it before." "I saw them," I said flatly. "So did 3 other men. Those weren't hallucinations. Methane exposure affects judgment, perception. You'd be surprised what the human brain can conjure when oxygen deprived." He pulled out a clipboard. "We'll need the names of everyone who's been near the affected sites." For medical evaluation, of course. I looked at the agents behind him, all standing at perfect attention, all wearing the same neutral expression. They weren't here to help. They were here to contain, not the creatures but the truth. "And if I don't cooperate?" I asked. Morrison's smile got wider. "Sheriff, I'd hate to see your pension disappear over a misunderstanding, or have questions raised about your fitness for duty. Mental health evaluations can take months. By then, I imagine the problem will have resolved itself. I'd been a cop long enough to know when I was beaten, or at least when to pretend I was beaten. What do you want me to do?" "Keep people away from the eastern farmlands. Tell them we're conducting environmental tests. We'll have everything wrapped up in 72 hours. He turned to leave, then stopped. "Oh, and Sheriff?" "The holes in the fields. We've already begun filling them with concrete, for everyone's safety. I watched them leave, their SUVs disappearing down Highway 6 in a cloud of dust. Then I got on the phone with James Collins. They're going to bury it, I told him. Literally. Seal the tunnels with concrete and pretend nothing happened. Will that work? James asked. Did it work in 1894? I shot back. Whatever they did back then, those things came back, and they'll come back again unless we do something permanent. Like what? Like making sure there's nothing left down there to come back. We spent the morning gathering supplies. Every farmer I trusted. Every man who'd seen what was really down in those tunnels. We loaded pickup trucks with diesel fuel, gasoline, fertilizer, anything flammable we could get our hands on. Morrison's team was focused on the eastern sites, the obvious ones. But I'd been mapping the circles, and I knew there were connections they hadn't found yet. Smaller holes, hidden in the more remote fields, places where the concrete trucks hadn't reached. By noon, we had identified 17 unsealed entrances, 17 points where those things could still emerge. We'll work in teams, I said, standing in James's barn with 24 men around me. 2 men per site. Pour the fuel down the holes, but don't light it yet. We need to do this simultaneously, trap them in the tunnels with nowhere to run. Dale, Bill Kaufman, said quietly, "The feds are gonna know it was us." "I don't care," I said. "I'd rather go to prison than watch those things take our families." No one argued. These were men who'd spent their lives working the land, protecting what was theirs. They understood that some threats you couldn't just bury and hope they'd go away. We split up at 2 p.m., each team heading to their assigned location. James and I took the site at the old Blackwell farm, the largest unsealed entrance, the one where we'd first gone underground. We arrived to find the area cordoned off with yellow caution tape, but no federal agents in sight. They were stretched thin, dealing with the more visible sites. The hole was still there, that perfect circular shaft descending into darkness. James backed his truck up to the edge, and we started unloading 50-gallon drums of diesel fuel. It took us 20 minutes to pour it all down that hole, watching the liquid disappear into the depths. "Think this'll be enough?" James asked. "It better be," I said, keying my radio. "All teams, status check." One by one, they reported in. 17 sites, 17 teams, all ready. I checked my watch, 3:47 p.m. "Light 'em up in 3 minutes," I said, synchronized, "and then get the hell out of there." James pulled out a road flare, the kind we kept in patrol cars for emergencies. He handed it to me. "You should do the honors, Sheriff. The official story will be that underground gas pockets ignited, causing catastrophic structural failure. You're going to bomb Nebraska." "We're going to save Nebraska," Morrison corrected. "This is the only way to make sure those things don't spread beyond Lancaster County. And Sheriff, for what it's worth, I'm sorry it came to this. Your actions today, burning those tunnels, you actually helped. You weakened them, forced them to surface before they were ready. If you hadn't done that, they might have spread undetected for weeks." I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or guilty. Probably both. The defensive line came together in under an hour. We had about 40 of Morrison's soldiers, another 30 local volunteers, and equipment that belonged in a science fiction movie. The arc lights were positioned every 100 yards, creating a wall of intense white light that cut across Highway 6. Behind them, the flamethrower teams waited. Behind us, the evacuation continued. Every civilian in eastern Lancaster County was being loaded onto buses and driven west. Parents clutching children, farmers leaving behind everything they'd ever known, all because of something that shouldn't exist. The sun was setting when they came. At first, it was just a few scouts, the smaller creatures, the ones we'd encountered underground. They approached the light barrier cautiously, their eyeless faces turning left and right like they were searching for a weakness. When one got too close to the arc lights, it shrieked and retreated, its translucent skin blistering. Then the main force arrived. They came over the eastern horizon like a pale tide, hundreds of them moving in an almost coordinated way. The bigger ones, the armored ones, were in front, using their bulk to shield the smaller creatures from the light. They advanced slowly but relentlessly toward our defensive line. "Light them up," Morrison ordered. The flamethrowers opened up simultaneously, sending gouts of burning fuel across Highway 6. The front ranks of creatures shrieked and burned, collapsing into writhing piles of melting flesh. But the ones behind them kept coming, climbing over their dying companions, using the bodies as shields. The sonic weapons activated with a sound like 1,000 fingernails on a chalkboard. I saw creatures stumble and fall, their movements becoming uncoordinated. But it only slowed them down. It didn't stop them. "Fall back to secondary positions," Morrison shouted. We retreated 50 yards to where another line of arc lights had been set up. The creatures followed, their pace quickening now that they'd learned to fear the flames. One of the armored ones charged through the fire, its plating protecting it long enough to reach our line. It grabbed one of Morrison's soldiers before we could react, its feeding slits opening wide. I shot it point blank with my service weapon. The bullets didn't penetrate its armor, but the impact made it drop the soldier. James hit it with his flamethrower, and this time the fuel found the gaps between its plates. It burned from the inside out, collapsing just feet from where I stood. The fight lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of falling back, of burning and shooting and fighting for every foot of ground. We lost 7 of Morrison's soldiers and 3 volunteers, but we held the line. We kept them east of Highway 6. By the time the last creature retreated back toward the tunnels, we were exhausted, burned, and running on nothing but adrenaline. The evacuation was complete. Every civilian had been moved at least 20 miles west of the containment zone. Morrison got the call at 11 p.m. "Confirm all personnel are clear of the eastern sector," he said into his satellite phone. Then, after a pause, authorization granted. "Commence Operation Cauterize." The bombers came in at midnight. I didn't see them. They were too high, too fast. But I felt the explosions. 6 of them, spaced across eastern Lancaster County, each one targeting a major junction in the tunnel network. The ground shook so hard that windows shattered in Lincoln. The night sky lit up with orange and red, and a mushroom cloud of dirt and smoke rose into the darkness. When it was over, Morrison's team moved in with their concrete trucks, sealing what was left of the collapsed tunnels. They worked through the night and into the next day, entombing those creatures in millions of tons of rubble and concrete. I stood at the edge of the containment zone, watching them work, and thought about what we'd buried. Not just the creatures, but the truth. The government would spin this as a gas explosion, a natural disaster. They'd pay off the displaced families, relocate them, make them sign papers promising silence. And in a few years, people would forget. The stories would become legend, then myth, then nothing at all. But I would remember. We all would. Everyone who'd been on that defensive line. Everyone who'd seen what came crawling up from the deep places of the earth. I retired 3 months later, like I said. Morrison arranged it, a full pension, early retirement due to health concerns. He even wrote me a letter of recommendation, though I never used it. What was I going to do, become a security guard at a mall? Instead, I moved to Arizona, desert country, where the ground is hard and dry and nothing could tunnel through solid rock. I bought a small house on the outskirts of Phoenix and tried to forget Nebraska. But you don't forget something like that. Not really. It stays with you, lurking in the back of your mind like those creatures lurked in their tunnels. I'm 74 now, and I've been watching the news with increasing concern. Crop circles in Kansas, Iowa, South Dakota, Montana, the same spiral patterns, the same impossible precision. Each time, the media shows aerial footage of mysterious formations in cornfields, and experts debate whether it's aliens or hoaxes or weather phenomena. But I know better. And so does Morrison, wherever he is now. Those patterns aren't messages from space. They're warnings from below. Markers that say, we're here, we're still here, and we're getting closer. Last month, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, it was Morrison. "Sheriff Hutchins," he said, and his voice sounded older, tired. "I wanted you to know that we've detected activity in the Nebraska sector again. The SEALs are holding, but there's movement, pressure building." "How long?" I asked. "Best estimate? 5 to 10 years before another emergence event. Maybe less if they've learned from last time." "And you'll handle it? Like you handled it before?" There was a long silence, then, "Sheriff, I'm retiring next month." The program is being shut down, defunded. Budget cuts, they say. National priorities have shifted. When those things come back, man, and they will come back, I don't know if anyone will be ready to stop them. He hung up before I could respond. I've thought about that conversation every day since, about Morrison retiring, about the program being shut down, about those SEALs weakening. And I've thought about the 11,000 people who disappeared in 1894, about how the government handled it back then by sealing the tunnels and waiting for everyone to forget. They came back in 1997. We sealed them again. And they're going to come back again. Maybe in 5 years. Maybe in 50. Because you can't kill something like that. You can only delay it, push it back, buy time for the next generation to deal with. I wonder sometimes if I should try to warn people. Write a book, do interviews, post my story online where anyone can read it. But who would believe a crazy old ex-sheriff with stories about underground monsters and government conspiracies? You might be reading this and thinking I'm senile or delusional or making it all up for attention. That's okay. I expected that. But do me a favor, this summer, if you see crop circles appearing in your area, if you hear about mysterious patterns in cornfields, don't go looking. Don't investigate. Don't stare down into any holes you find in the ground. Just pack up your family and leave. Move somewhere far from farmland. Somewhere with solid bedrock, somewhere those things can't reach. Because they're still down there, waiting, patient. And eventually, maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but eventually, they're going to break through again. And next time, there might not be anyone like Morrison to stop them. Next time, those crop circles might be the last warning we get before thousands of them emerge at once, spreading across the heartland like a plague. Next time, we might not be able to seal them away. I'm an old man now. I won't live to see what happens next. But you might. Your children might. And when those circles appear again, when you see those perfect spiral patterns carved into the corn, you'll remember this story. You'll remember Sheriff Dale Hutchins, who saw what crawled up from the depths. And maybe, just maybe, you'll do what I didn't have the courage to do. You'll run. This account was found among Sheriff Dale Hutchins' personal effects after his death in Phoenix, Arizona, in January 2019. Federal authorities have declined to comment on the events described. Lancaster County records show no unusual incidents in the summer of 1997, though land records indicate significant property transfers and government purchases in the eastern sector during that period. Crop circles continue to appear across the American Midwest every summer. The patterns are always the same. and the tunnels beneath Nebraska remain sealed. For now. We'll work in teams, I said, standing in James's barn with 24 men around me. 2 men per site. Pour the fuel down the holes, but don't light it yet. We need to do this simultaneously, trap them in the tunnels with nowhere to run. Dale, Bill Kaufman said quietly, the feds are going to know it was us. I don't care, I said. I'd rather go to prison than watch those things take our families. No one argued. These were men who'd spent their lives working the land, protecting what was theirs. They understood that some threats you couldn't just bury and hope they'd go away. I'd been a cop long enough to know when I was beaten. What do you want me to do? Keep people away from the eastern farmlands. Tell them we're conducting environmental tests. We'll have everything wrapped up in 72 hours. He turned to leave, then stopped. Oh, and Sheriff? The holes in the fields. We've already begun filling them with concrete. For everyone's safety. They left before I could argue, their SUVs disappearing down Highway 6 in a cloud of dust. I sat in my office staring at the wall, trying to figure out my next move. Morrison and his team were sealing the tunnels, trapping those creatures underground. Maybe that would work. Maybe they'd starve down there, die out, become nothing but another buried secret in Nebraska's history. But I kept thinking about 1894, about 11,000 people who'd vanished. The government had handled it back then too, and whatever they'd done hadn't stopped it from happening again. At 3 p.m., James Collins burst into my office, his face pale. Dale, you need to see this. We drove to his farm in silence. When we got there, I understood why he'd been so upset. The crop circle on his property, the one where I'd first seen the creature emerge, was different. The corn wasn't just bent anymore, it was dead, withered to brown stalks, and in the center the ground had collapsed inward, creating a depression about 10 feet wide. It's getting bigger, James said. Whatever's down there, it's eating through the ground. The concrete the feds poured, it's not going to hold. He was right. I could see cracks spreading through the depression, hear a faint rumbling from below. The tunnels were expanding, getting closer to the surface. How many circles did you say there were? James asked. Last count. 47. I did the math in my head, my stomach dropping. 47 points where the barrier between their world and ours is weak. 47 places where they could break through. Then we need to warn people. Get them out of here before... The ground shook. It started as a vibration, the same feeling I'd experienced before, but stronger. The windows in James's house rattled. His barn doors swung open and slammed shut, and across the fields I saw them rising, dozens of them, hundreds, pale shapes pulling themselves up through collapsing earth, through the sealed holes that Morrison's team had filled with concrete. The concrete crumbled like sand as they emerged, their eyeless faces turning toward the afternoon sun. Get everyone, I said to James, my voice surprisingly calm. Every farmer, every family in the eastern county. Tell them to evacuate west. Don't stop. Don't look back. Go now. James ran for his truck without hesitation. I grabbed my radio, switched to the emergency frequency. This is Sheriff Hutchins to all units. We have a mass evacuation situation in progress. Eastern Lancaster County, all civilians move west immediately. This is not a drill. Tommy's voice crackled back. Sheriff, what's going on? Just trust me, I said. And Tommy? Bring every flare gun, every incendiary device you can find. We're going to need them. I drove back toward town, watching in my rearview mirror as more creatures emerged from the fields. They moved differently in daylight. Slower, more cautious, like nocturnal animals forced into the sun. But they were still coming, a pale tide flowing across the landscape. By the time I reached the courthouse, word had spread. Cars jammed Highway 6, families fleeing with whatever they could carry. I saw Morrison's black SUVs parked outside the sheriff's station, the agents watching the chaos with clinical detachment. Morrison approached me. "Sheriff, what are you doing?" "You're causing unnecessary panic. They're coming up," I said, pointing east. "All of them. Your concrete didn't work. Nothing's going to stop them except fire." For the first time, Morrison's neutral expression cracked. I saw fear in his eyes just for a moment. "How many?" "More than I can count. We need to create a fire break, burn the fields, force them back underground." "We can't," Morrison said. "The smoke, the attention, it would expose everything." "There's nothing left to hide," I shouted. "People are going to die if we don't act now." Morrison pulled out his phone, made a quick call. Whatever orders he received made his jaw tighten. "We have authorization for controlled burns. But Sheriff, this conversation never happened. Those things you saw, they don't exist. This was a wildfire, started by lightning. Are we clear?" "Crystal," I said. The next 6 hours were chaos. We worked with Morrison's team, with the volunteer fire department, with anyone brave or stupid enough to stay. We soaked the fields with gasoline and diesel, created fire breaks around populated areas, and when the creatures reached the edge of town just after sunset, we lit it all up. The flames spread fast, consuming the dead corn, racing through the fields toward the advancing creatures. I stood on top of the courthouse, watching through binoculars as they hit the wall of fire. They tried to push through, but the flames drove them back, their translucent skin bubbling and burning. Their shrieks filled the air. That terrible steam pipe sound multiplied by hundreds. Some turned back, retreating underground. Others pushed forward anyway, dying in the flames, their bodies collapsing into ash and smoke. We kept the fires burning all night, feeding them, making sure nothing got through. By dawn, it was over. The fires had burned themselves out, leaving blackened earth stretching for miles. The creatures were gone. Dead or driven back underground, I didn't know which. Morrison's team swept the area with some kind of detection equipment, then declared the site clear. They brought in bulldozers, filled in every tunnel entrance with tons of concrete and steel reinforcement. They paid off the affected farmers, made them sign non-disclosure agreements. Within a week, the official story was set. A freak lightning storm had caused wildfires that burned thousands of acres of farmland. Tragic, but explainable. Nobody talked about the creatures. The people who'd seen them were either gone, evacuated and relocated by the federal government, or silenced with threats and money. The photograph I'd received was confiscated. My reports were sealed. I retired 3 months later. Took Morrison's advice about my mental health and walked away from the badge I'd worn for over 2 decades. Some people said I'd had a breakdown, that the stress had gotten to me. I let them think that. It was easier than the truth. I'm 74 now, living in Arizona where there's nothing but desert and cactus. No cornfields, no farmland, nothing that reminds me of Nebraska. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it, that rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat from deep underground. They're still down there. I know they are. Morrison and his team didn't kill them, just drove them deeper, sealed them in. But seals can be broken. And whatever created those creatures, whatever brought them to our world in 1894 and again in 1997, is still out there, waiting for another chance. This summer, I've been watching the news. Crop circles appearing in Kansas, in Iowa, in South Dakota. The same spiral patterns, the same impossible precision. The media calls it a mystery, a hoax, maybe aliens. But I know better. They're not from outer space. They're from right here, from deep beneath our feet, in tunnels that stretch across the heartland like the roots of some terrible tree. And every circle that appears is another crack in the seal, another doorway opening. The farmers who call in these sightings, who stand in their fields and wonder what made those patterns, I want to tell them to run, to sell their land and move to the city, put as much concrete and steel between themselves and the earth as possible. But I don't. Because who would believe a crazy old ex-sheriff with stories about underground creatures and government cover-ups? Who would believe that the crop circles aren't made by aliens but by something far worse? I'll tell you what I told Morrison that night, when the fires were still burning and the creatures were retreating underground. This isn't over. It's never over. It's just waiting. Waiting for the next summer when the corn grows tall. Waiting for the next generation of farmers to plant their fields in the wrong soil. Waiting for someone to forget, or to stop paying attention, or to dismiss the old stories as superstition. And when that happens, when the circles appear again and no one remembers what they really mean, those things will come back. They'll break through. And this time, maybe Morrison and his team won't be able to stop them. So if you see crop circles this summer, if you hear about mysterious patterns appearing in your area, don't go looking. Don't investigate. Don't stare down into any holes you find in the ground. Just run, and pray that whatever's down there decides to go back to sleep. Because if it doesn't, well, you'll find out what happened to those 11,000 people in 1894. And maybe, just maybe, you'll understand why some secrets should stay buried.